The colony world of New Busan was beautiful in the spring. Green hills rolled toward the horizon. Rivers cut through valleys filled with farms and small towns. Children played in parks while their parents worked in offices and factories. 11 million people called this world home, and most of them had never known war. Taiho Park stood on his balcony and watched the sunrise. He was a captain in the colony's defense force, but his job was mostly boring. Nothing ever happened on New Busan. The nearest enemy was 1,000 light years away. Nobody had any reason to attack a farming colony. He had taken this quiet posting 3 years ago to spend more time with his family. His daughter, Yuna, ran onto the balcony and grabbed his leg. She was 7 years old, with big eyes and a smile that could light up any room. Her mother, Hannah, followed behind, carrying a cup of coffee and shaking her head. She woke up early again, Hannah said. I think she's too excited about the school trip tomorrow. Taiho picked up his daughter and held her close. Are you going to see the big waterfall? He asked. Yes. Teacher says it's the biggest waterfall on the whole planet. Yuna said. Taiho smiled and kissed her forehead. He had no idea that this would be the last peaceful morning of his life. Far away. In the dark space between stars, 200 warships moved in silence. They belonged to the Valorian Dominion, one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. The Valorians were tall beings with gray skin and cold eyes. They had ruled over dozens of species for thousands of years. And they did not like the way humanity was spreading across the stars. Hi, Commander Raylos stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the image of New Busan on his screen. He felt nothing but contempt for the humans who lived there. To him, they were insects. Short-lived creatures who bred too fast and spread too far. The Dominion Council had given him a simple order. Teach the humans their place. Show them what happens when weak species forget their betters. Raylos smiled. He would make an example that no one would ever forget on New Busan. Taiho was eating breakfast with his family when his communicator started screaming. The alert sound was one he had never heard before in real life, only in training exercises. It meant one thing: enemy ships in orbit. He jumped from his chair and ran to the window. The sky had changed. Where there had been blue, there was now fire. Hundreds of bright streaks were falling toward the planet like burning rain. Get to the basement, Taiho said to his wife. His voice was calm, but his hands were shaking. Take Yuna and go now. Hannah grabbed their daughter and ran. Taiho tried to reach his command center on the communicator, but all he got was static. He ran outside and saw his neighbors standing in the streets, looking up at the sky with confusion and fear. Then the first bombs hit. The explosion was so bright that Taiho went blind for a moment. When he could see again, half of the buildings on his street were gone, replaced by fire and smoke and screaming. He tried to run back to his house, but another explosion threw him to the ground above the planet. High Commander Relos watched the bombardment with satisfaction. His ships were not targeting military bases. They were targeting cities, schools, hospitals, homes. The Dominion Council wanted a message sent, and Relos was writing that message in fire and blood. Launch the ground forces, he ordered. No survivors. Taiho woke up buried under broken concrete. His ears were ringing and his body was covered in blood, but he was alive. He pushed himself free and looked around at what used to be his neighborhood. Everything was destroyed. Bodies lay in the streets. Some of them were children. He stumbled toward his house, or what was left of it. The building had collapsed. He started digging through the rubble with his bare hands. Screaming his wife's name over and over, he found them in what used to be the basement. Hannah was lying on top of Yuna, her body covering her daughter like a shield. There was blood everywhere. Hannah's eyes were open. They saw nothing. Yuna was breathing. Barely. Her mother had protected her from the worst of the collapse, giving her own life to save her child. Taiho pulled his daughter free and held her against his chest. She was unconscious, but alive. He looked at his wife's body and felt something break inside him. Something that would never heal. Valorian soldiers were marching through the burning streets now. Taiho could hear their weapons firing. He could hear people screaming and then going silent. They were killing everyone they found. He picked up Yuna and ran. The underground bunkers had been built during the colony's founding. When the first settlers worried about natural disasters, Taiho found one of the hidden entrances and carried his daughter inside. There were others already there. Soldiers from his garrison. Civilians who had been lucky enough to escape. Children who had lost their parents. They stayed in the bunker for 3 days. Above them, the killing continued. The Valorians were thorough. They went building by building, street by street, making sure no one was left alive. When it was finally over, Taiho led the survivors to the surface. What they found broke their hearts. New Busan was dead. Every city had been destroyed. Every town had been burned. The beautiful green hills were black with ash. The rivers ran red with blood. Of 11 million people, only 847 had survived. Most of them were children. High Commander Raylos broadcast his message to the entire galaxy. He stood in front of a pile of human corpses and smiled at the camera. "Let this serve as a reminder," he said. "Humanity exists because we allow it. Step beyond your boundaries again, and every human world will burn like this one. Know your place, insects." He expected the other species of the galaxy to nod in approval. He expected the humans to beg for mercy, to promise they would never expand again, to accept their status as a lesser species. He did not understand what he had done. Taiho stood in the ruins of his home, holding his silent daughter in his arms. Yuna had not spoken since he pulled her from the rubble. She just stared at nothing, her eyes empty and broken. Around him, the other survivors were doing the same thing, standing in the ashes of their lives, looking at the sky where the Valorian ships had disappeared. There were no tears. There was no screaming. There was only silence. A cold, terrible silence that spread across the ruined world like a disease. The Valorians thought they had broken humanity with their massacre. They thought they had sent a message of fear and submission, but they had made a mistake. A mistake that would cost them everything, because humanity was not afraid. Humanity was not broken. Humanity was angry, and somewhere in the silence, in the hearts of every survivor on New Busan and every human who watched the broadcast across 100 worlds, a promise was being made. A promise written in blood and ash and grief. The Valorians wanted to teach humanity its place. Humanity was about to teach them something far worse. The distress signal from New Busan traveled through space for 17 hours before it reached Earth. By then, the killing was already over. Admiral Sora Yoon was sitting in a meeting about ship maintenance budgets when her aide walked in. The young officer's face was pale. His hands were shaking. He handed her a tablet without saying a word. Sora looked at the screen and saw hell. The footage showed cities burning, bodies lying in the streets, Valorian soldiers executing civilians, children crying over the bodies of their parents. And at the end, High Commander Raylos standing among the dead and telling humanity to know its place. Sora watched the entire video twice. Her face did not change. Her hands did not shake, but something shifted behind her eyes. Something cold and hard and patient. She stood up and looked at the officers in the room. "Cancel all leave. Recall every ship. Meeting adjourned." Within 6 hours, every human government had seen the footage. Within 12 hours, the United Earth Council called an emergency session. Leaders from 100 colony worlds attended through quantum link. There was no argument. There was no debate. There was no vote against. President Wu Jinkong addressed humanity from the steps of the Global Assembly. Billions of people watched on their screens, in their homes, on distant worlds. "They believed we were weak because we chose peace," he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with controlled rage. "They believed we were fragile because we valued life. They were wrong. We will show them what we are. We will teach them what happens when you hurt our children." He paused and looked directly into the camera. "From this moment, the human race is at war. Total war. We will not stop until justice is done. We will not rest until every person responsible for this crime answers for it. And we will make sure that no species ever thinks about hurting our people again. The next morning, something strange happened across human space. Something that had never happened before in their history. Humanity stopped fighting itself. Old enemies shook hands. Political opponents worked together. Corporations that had competed for decades now shared resources without question. Every factory that made consumer products switched to war production. Every shipyard that built passenger vessels started building warships. There were no protests. No anti-war movements. No debates about whether violence was the right answer. 11 million people had been murdered, most of them civilians, many of them children. Every human being had watched the footage. Every human being had seen the Valorian commander smiling over the corpses. There was nothing to debate. There was only work to be done. Dr. Mingy Beek was one of the greatest scientists in human history. She had spent her entire career studying the nature of space and time, trying to unlock the secrets of the universe. She had always refused to work on weapons. She believed science should help people, not hurt them. Then she watched the footage from New Busan. She watched it 3 times. And then she called the Minister of Defense. "Tell me what you need," she said. "I will build it." They gave her unlimited resources, unlimited staff, unlimited funding. Her task was simple: create something that would end this war quickly, and make sure nothing like New Busan ever happened again. Minji worked 20 hours a day. When she slept, she dreamed of burning cities and dead children. Those dreams pushed her to work faster. On New Busan, the survivors were gathered for evacuation. Rescue ships had arrived from Earth and the nearby colonies, bringing food and medicine and grief counselors. The 847 survivors were loaded onto transports and taken away from the dead world, Taeho. Park refused to leave. His daughter Yuna had still not spoken. She sat in the corner of their temporary shelter and stared at the wall, lost somewhere inside herself. Doctor said she might never recover. Taeho held her hand and talked to her anyway, telling her stories about her mother, promising her that everything would be okay. When the military doctors came to examine him, they found that he had 3 broken ribs, a fractured arm, and internal bleeding. They wanted to send him to a hospital on Earth. He refused. "I want to fight," he said. "Give me a ship. Give me a weapon. Give me something." The doctors tried to explain that he was too injured, too traumatized, too valuable as a witness. Taeho did not listen. He kept asking until someone finally forwarded his request to Admiral Yoon. She called him personally. "You want to fight?" she asked. "Yes. Your daughter needs you. Your injuries are serious. You have every right to go home and heal." "My home is ashes," Taeho said. His voice was flat and empty. "My wife is dead. My daughter is broken. I have nothing left except this. Please, let me be part of what comes next." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, till first Admiral Yoon finally said, "Then report to the 3rd Fleet. I'll make sure there's a place for you." 6 months passed. The Valorian Dominion celebrated their victory over New Busan. They held parades and gave medals to the soldiers who had participated in the massacre. High Commander Relos was promoted and praised as a hero, who had put the upstart humans in their place. Their intelligence services reported that human activity had gone quiet. No angry messages. No threats. No military movements. The Valorian Council believed that their lesson had worked. The humans were afraid. The humans had accepted their place in the galaxy. They sent no additional fleets to their borders. They built no new defenses. They went back to their normal lives, confident that the matter was settled. Other species in the galaxy watched and wondered. The Kelleray, an ancient race of traders, had dealt with humans for decades. They knew something the Valorians did not. Humans are not quiet when they are afraid, the Kelleray ambassador told his government. Humans scream and cry and make noise when they are afraid. When humans go quiet, that is when you should worry. That is when they are planning something. In the deep space construction yards of humanity, ships were being built at a rate that should have been impossible. New designs, new weapons, new technologies that had been theoretical just months before. Dr. Mingy Beek finished her weapon in the 5th month. She called it the Collapse Driver. It used the same science that allowed ships to travel through fold space, but twisted it into something terrible. A weapon that could create artificial black holes, tiny points of infinite gravity that existed for only seconds, but destroyed everything they touched. She tested it once on an asteroid. The asteroid simply vanished, crushed into nothingness. Mingy looked at what she had created and felt sick. But then she remembered the footage. She remembered the children. "Build more," she told her team. "Build as many as we can." At the end of 6 months, Admiral Sora Yoon stood on the bridge of her flagship and looked at the fleet assembled before her. 3,000 warships, more than humanity had ever gathered in one place. Each one was equipped with weapons that had not existed half a year ago. She opened a channel to the entire fleet. "Today, we begin our answer," she said. "Today, we remind the galaxy why you should never hurt our people. Today, we show them what humanity becomes when you take everything from us." She paused and thought of New Busan. She thought of 11 million dead. She thought of the children. "No mercy," she said. "No retreat. No forgiveness. Let's go to work." The fleet moved as one, disappearing into fold space, heading toward Valorian territory. The silence was over. The thunder was about to begin. Station. Keth was a Valorian border outpost at the edge of their territory. It was not a military base, not really. Just a supply station, with a small garrison of soldiers who had been sent there as punishment for minor failures. Nothing important ever happened at Station Keps. Commander Velik was drinking his morning tea when the alarm started screaming. He spilled the hot liquid on his uniform and cursed as he ran to the command center. His officers were staring at their screens with looks of pure terror. "What is it?" Velik demanded. "Ships, Commander. Human ships. How many?" The officer swallowed hard. "All of them, sir. I think all of them." Velik looked at the screen and felt his blood turn cold. 3,000 warships were appearing from fold space, emerging from directions that should have been impossible. The humans had found routes through uncharted space that the Valorians had thought were impassable. He tried to send a distress signal. He managed to broadcast for 12 seconds before the first human missiles hit the station's communication array. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 47 minutes. Station Keth had no defenses that could stand against what the humans had brought. The Valorian soldiers fought bravely, but bravery does not stop missiles and energy beams. When it was over, the station was nothing but floating debris. Vice Admiral Jinho Lee, commander of the human vanguard, watched the destruction from his bridge. His orders were simple and absolute. No survivors, no retreat, no mercy. He had lost cousins on New Busan. He felt no guilt about following those orders. "Send the message," he told his communications officer. A single transmission was broadcast to Valorian space. Short and simple, "This is the beginning. New Busan sends its regards. I, Commander Raylos, received news of Station Keth's destruction 3 hours later." He was not worried. One outpost meant nothing. The humans had probably thrown everything they had at it in a desperate attempt to show strength. He would crush them and add this defeat to their humiliation. He dispatched a response fleet of 500 warships, led by one of his best commanders, more than enough to handle whatever the humans had left. The fleet traveled through fold space toward the last known position of the human forces. They emerged in a region of empty space. Sensors searching for their enemy. Commander Yoon Ji-han was waiting for them. The Vengeance of Busan was a new kind of ship. Built in the 6 months of silence, it was larger and more powerful than anything humanity had ever created. Yeonji stood on its bridge, surrounded by officers who had all lost someone on New Busan. When the Valorian fleet appeared on her sensors, she smiled. "Light them up," she ordered. The ambush was perfect. Human ships had hidden themselves in the sensor shadows of nearby asteroids, waiting in silence for days. When the Valorian fleet arrived, they were surrounded before they knew what was happening. The battle lasted less than 3 hours. The Valorians fought hard, but they were outgunned, outnumbered, and outmaneuvered. Their ships exploded one by one, turning into balls of fire against the dark of space. When it was over, not a single Valorian ship remained. Human losses, 12 ships. Yunji opened a channel to the fleet. Casualties? Minimal, Commander. Most crews evacuated before their ships were destroyed. Could send the wounded to the medical ships. Everyone else, prepare to move. We're not done yet. News of the defeat reached the Valorian homeworld like a punch to the stomach. 500 ships gone. Destroyed by the species they had dismissed as insects. For the first time, the Dominion Council began to feel something they had not felt in centuries. Fear. But the worst was yet to come. The fortress world of Theron was one of the most important military bases in the Valorian Dominion. 900 warships were stationed in orbit, protecting weapons factories and training facilities. It was considered impossible to attack. Defended by layers of shields and weapons platforms, the human fleet arrived without warning. Appearing from fold space like ghosts, Admiral Sora Yoon looked at the Valorian defensive fleet and thought about what Dr. Minjibeek had given her. She thought about the weapon that could end this battle in seconds. She thought about the cost. Then she thought about New Busan. She thought about the children. Deploy the collapse drivers, she ordered. The devices were small, almost invisible against the vastness of space. They shot toward the Valorian fleet like seeds thrown by a farmer. For a moment, nothing happened. Then space itself began to scream. Tiny points of darkness appeared throughout the Valorian formation. Points where gravity became infinite, where matter was crushed into nothing. Ships that had been proud and powerful were simply erased from existence. Pulled apart and consumed by artificial black holes that lasted only seconds, but destroyed everything they touched. 900 warships. Vanished in less than a minute. Not destroyed. Not damaged. Just gone. The Valorians on Theron watched from the surface and could not understand what they were seeing. Their entire defensive fleet had been erased by weapons that broke the laws of physics as they understood them. Then the human ground forces came. Taiho Park was part of the first wave. His ribs had healed. His arm had healed. But something inside him had never healed and never would. He led his squad through the streets of Theron's capital city, fighting through Valorian soldiers who were still shocked by what had happened to their fleet. He was efficient, cold, precise. He killed without hesitation and without emotion. His squadmates watched him with a mixture of respect and concern. They had heard his story. They understood. The humans did not massacre the civilians of Theron. That was important. That was the difference between them and the Valorians. They destroyed military targets, weapons factories, shipyards, communication centers. But they let the civilians go, even helped evacuate those caught in the fighting. A reporter embedded with Taiho's unit asked him about this. They killed everyone on New Busan, she said. Why don't we do the same to them? Taiho stopped walking. He looked at the reporter with eyes that had seen too much death. Because we are not them, he said. We are better than them. That is why we will win, and that is why they will lose. They created monsters. We just want justice. He pulled out a small screen from his pocket and showed her a picture. A woman and a little girl, smiling in a garden, the sun shining behind them. My wife died protecting our daughter, he said. She did not die so that I could become like the people who killed her. She died believing that we were good. I will not prove her wrong. He put the screen away and started walking again. The reporter watched him go, and she understood something important. The humans were not fighting because they hated the Valorians. They were fighting because they loved their own people. And that made them far more dangerous. System after system fell to the human advance. The Valorians tried to fight back, but they could not match the weapons humanity had created. They could not match the cold determination of soldiers who had watched 11 million of their people die. High Commander Relos sent urgent messages to the Galactic Council, begging for help. The elder species who ruled the galaxy surely would not allow this to continue. Surely they would stop the humans before it was too late. But the Council was silent, and the human fleet kept coming. The thunder had become a storm, and the storm was heading straight for the heart of the Valorian Dominion. Hi! Commander Relos stood in the war room of the Valorian homeworld and watched his empire burn. Map after map showed red zones where human forces had taken control. Fortress worlds that had stood for 1,000 years were now occupied or destroyed. Fleets that had terrorized the galaxy were scattered debris floating in space. He had not slept in days. His gray skin had turned pale, and his hands shook when he tried to hold anything. The commander who had smiled over human corpses 9 months ago now looked like a ghost of himself. Where is the Council's response? He demanded for the 100th time. We are members of the Galactic Council. They must help us. His aide looked at the floor. No response, Commander. They say, our communications are being received, but there is no reply. Relos slammed his fist on the table. They cannot just abandon us. We are one of the founding members of the Council. We have served the galaxy for thousands of years. But the Galactic Council had made its decision. In their great chamber, where representatives of dozens of species gathered to discuss the fate of worlds, Arbiter Consul Marin delivered the judgment that would seal the Valorian fate. The Kellery ambassador had requested the emergency session. He displayed the footage from New Busan on the great screen, forcing every representative to watch what the Valorians had done. When the footage ended, the chamber was silent. The Valorians have asked for our intervention, Marin said. They want us to stop the human advance. They claim the humans are violating the principles of civilized warfare. A sound came from the chamber. It took a moment for Marin to realize it was laughter. Bitter, angry laughter from representatives who had feared the Valorians for generations. They massacred 11 million civilians, the Kellery ambassador said. They broadcast the killing as entertainment. They smiled over the bodies of children. And now they ask us to save them from the consequences? Marin raised his hand for silence. The Council must decide. Do we intervene? The vote was taken. Not a single species voted to help the Valorians. Even their old allies, species who had benefited from Valorian protection for centuries, refused to lift a finger. Marin sent the response personally. He connected to the Valorian Command Center and looked at High Commander Relos on the screen. Massacred 11 million civilians and broadcasted as a warning, Marin said. His voice was cold. You invited this response. The Council will not intervene in a war of your own making. Face the consequences of your actions alone. The connection ended. Relos stared at the blank screen and finally understood that no one was coming to save them. In the Council chamber, after the session ended, the ambassadors spoke quietly among themselves. They had all dismissed humans before. Short-lived creatures, emotional, primitive, not worth attention. Now they watched the humans tear through one of the galaxy's major powers, like fire through dry grass. How did we miss this? The ambassador from the Viren Collective asked. How did we not see what they were capable of? The Kellery ambassador shook his head. We saw what they showed us. Traders, farmers, explorers. We thought that was all they were. Then what are they really? The Kellery ambassador thought for a long moment before answering. They are what they have always been. A species that loves its children. We just never understood what that meant until now. 9 months after the massacre of New Busan, the human fleet arrived at the Valorian homeworld. Admiral Sora Yoon stood on the bridge of her flagship and looked at the planet where the orders for New Busan had been given. 10,000 human warships surrounded it, blocking every escape route. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Broadcast our terms, she ordered. The message went out on every frequency, translated into the Valorian language: unconditional surrender. The immediate dissolution of all Valorian military forces, full reparations for the survivors of New Busan, the extradition of High Commander Relos and every officer involved in the massacre to stand. Trial for crimes against humanity, the Valorian High Council received the terms and debated for 6 hours. Many wanted to surrender. They had seen what human weapons could do. They knew their defenses could not stop the collapsed drivers, but Relos would not allow it. He had too much to lose. If he surrendered, he would be tried and executed. Better to fight and die with honor than face human justice. Our homeworld's defenses are the strongest in the Dominion, he argued. They cannot break through. Their weapons require time to charge. We will destroy them before they can use them. He was wrong. Admiral Yoon gave the order, and the second-generation collapse drivers activated. These were more powerful than the ones used at Theron, refined and improved in the months since. The Valorian orbital defense platforms vanished one by one, swallowed by tiny black holes that appeared and disappeared in seconds. The defensive fleet tried to fight. They launched missiles and energy beams at the human ships. A few found their targets. Human ships died, their crews lost to the void. But for every human ship that fell, 100 Valorian ships were erased from existence in less than an hour. The space around the Valorian homeworld was empty, except for human ships and debris. Ground forces launched immediately. Human soldiers, many of them volunteers from New Bizen's sister colonies, descended on the planet in drop pods and landing craft. They had trained for this moment for months. Every one of them knew what the Valorians had done. Every one of them carried that knowledge with them into battle. The fighting was fierce. The Valorians defended their homeworld with desperate courage, but they were outmatched. Human technology had advanced by years in the span of months. Human soldiers fought with a cold determination that could not be broken. Taiho Park led his unit through the government district. They moved building by building, clearing Valorian soldiers who refused to surrender. He had been promoted twice since the war began, but he still fought on the front lines. He needed to be there. He needed to see this through to the end. When they reached the main government building, they found that the Valorian leadership had fled. All except one. Relos was in his command bunker, trying to destroy evidence. Files about New Busan, communications that proved he had ordered the massacre, records that would condemn him at trial. Taeho was part of the unit that broke down the bunker door. He was the first one through, his weapon raised, his heart pounding. Relos looked up from his console. For a long moment, the two enemies stared at each other. The Valorian commander who had started the war, and the human soldier who had lost everything in its first hour. "You should have killed us all," Taeho said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 9 months of grief and rage. "You should have made sure there was no one left to remember. Because we remember. We always remember." Relos tried to speak, but no words came. He had seen humans as insects, as lesser beings not worth consideration. Now he looked into Taiho's eyes and saw something that made him understand. Finally, what his species had awakened. The human did not kill him. That would have been too easy. Instead, Taiho stepped aside and let his soldiers take the commander into custody. "You will face trial," Taiho said. "You will answer for what you did. And you will live long enough to see your empire turn to dust." Outside, the fighting was ending. Valorian soldiers were surrendering across the planet. The statues of conquest that had stood for centuries were being pulled down. The halls of military glory were burning. The Valorian Dominion, one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, had fallen in 9 months. Destroyed by a species they had dismissed as insects, Admiral Yoon broadcast. Her message to the galaxy from the conquered capital: "The war is over," she said. "Justice has been done. Let this be a lesson to anyone who would harm our people. We do not seek conquest. We do not desire empire, but we protect our own. Always." The galaxy watched and listened and learned a truth they would never forget. Humanity was dangerous. Not because they were strong or advanced or numerous, but because they loved their children, and they would destroy anyone who hurt them. The Valorians had awakened. Something they did not understand, and now they would live with the consequences forever. The trial began. Exactly 1 year after the massacre of New Busan, it was held on Earth. In a courtroom built specifically for this purpose, High Commander Relos and 47 other Valorian officers sat in the dock, their gray skin pale under the harsh lights. Their eyes avoiding the cameras that broadcast their faces across the galaxy. Every species was watching. The Galactic Council had sent observers. Reporters from 100 worlds filled the gallery. Billions of beings waited to see how humanity would deliver justice. Prosecutor Da Xin stood before the court and began presenting her case. She was a small woman with a soft voice, but when she spoke, the room went silent. She had spent the last 3 months gathering evidence, interviewing survivors, and building a case that would leave no doubt about what had happened on New Busan. The evidence was overwhelming. Communications showing that Relos had ordered the attack on civilian targets. Video recordings from Valorian soldiers' helmets showing the murders of unarmed men, women, and children. Testimony from the 847 survivors describing what they had witnessed. For 6 weeks, the prosecution presented its case. The galaxy watched as the full horror of the massacre was laid bare. Some species had thought the humans were exaggerating. They were not. If anything, the reality was worse than what had been reported. On the 4th week, the children of New Busan gave their testimony. They appeared on screen. Recorded statements from young people who had survived the worst day in human history. They talked about watching their parents die. They talked about hiding in basements while bombs fell. They talked about the smell of smoke and the sound of screaming. Unipark was one of them. She was 8 years old now. Her father had told her she did not have to do this, that she had suffered enough. But she wanted to. She needed to. She sat in front of the camera with her father beside her, just off screen. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she began to speak. My name is Unipark. I was 7 years old when they came. I lived in a yellow house with my mother and father. We had a garden with flowers. My mother liked to plant things. Her voice was small but steady. The courtroom was completely silent. When the bombs came, my mother told me to hide. She covered me with her body. I could feel her heart beating. Then something hit us, and I could not feel it anymore. Una paused. Her eyes were wet, but she did not cry. I stayed under my mother for a long time. I do not know how long. She was cold. She did not move. My father found me and pulled me out. He was crying. I had never seen him cry before. She looked directly at the camera, and in that moment she seemed much older than 8. My mother died so I could live. She was brave. The men who killed her were not brave. They killed children and old people and families. That is not brave. That is evil. She stopped speaking. Across the galaxy, beings who had never met a human felt tears in their eyes. The verdict was delivered after 2 days of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Every single defendant. The sentences were carried out on the anniversary of the massacre on the soil of New Busan itself. It was not done in anger or cruelty. It was done with cold, quiet efficiency. The condemned were executed quickly. Their deaths broadcast to the galaxy just as they had broadcast the massacre of innocent people. Relos died last. His final words were a plea for mercy that no one answered. The Valorian Dominion was officially dissolved. Their military was dismantled. Their conquered territories were freed. Their homeworld was placed under permanent monitoring, watched by human and allied ships to ensure they could never rebuild their war machine. But humanity did not commit genocide. They did not slaughter Valorian civilians as Valorians had slaughtered theirs. They proved in the end they were better than their enemies. Admiral Sora Yoon was invited to address the Galactic Council in person. She was the first human to ever stand in that ancient chamber, speaking to the assembled representatives of dozens of civilizations. She wore her uniform, decorated with medals from the war. Her hair had turned gray in the last year, aged by the weight of the decision she had made. But her eyes were clear and her voice was strong. You watched as our children were slaughtered, she said. The chamber was silent. No one dared to interrupt. You judged us too primitive, too weak, too short-lived to matter. You thought we would cry and beg and accept our fate. You were wrong. She paused and looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each ambassador. We are not the strongest species in this galaxy. We are not the oldest. We do not have the best technology or the largest empire. But we are the most dangerous thing you have ever encountered. Not because we are powerful, but because we love our children, and we do not forget those who harm them. The Kalari ambassador leaned forward, listening intently. We do not seek conquest. We do not desire empire. We want to trade, to explore, to learn, to grow. We want to be your friends and your partners. But understand this clearly. Humanity protects its own. Any species that harms our people will face consequences. There will be no warning. There will be no negotiation. There will only be justice. She let the words hang in the air. The Valorians thought they could break us with fear. They failed. Let their failure be a lesson to everyone in this chamber. We are not afraid of you. We never will be. Treat us with respect, and we will be the best friends you have ever had. Hurt our people, and we will be the worst enemies you can imagine. She finished speaking and stood in silence. For a long moment, no one moved.